Hi, I'm John. Welcome to Edgetone Studios. So, I've been doing a lot of thinking because I do that a lot. I've been thinking a lot about gear because I do that a lot. I love gear. And one of the results of all that thinking is that I've decided to completely give up on hybrid mixing. And I'm going to tell you why. Let's get to it. So anyone who's following my channel knows that I worked on restoring a Sony MPX 3036 console with the idea of placing it in this room. And one of the reasons I chose not to use it at the end of the day was partly how it complicated my setup. Definitely it would be a hybrid mixing setup, and I was planning to do more hybrid mixing than I currently do. But partly it was because it was just too large for the space, and the amount of change required to get the cabling rerouted and set up was immense. And I spent countless hours plotting and planning patch bay layouts, how everything would be connected, and finally made the decision to not keep the console, and that has now moved on to a new owner. And I went back to my old setup, and I was pretty happy with that. But some recent gear changes had me switch things around. After the console, I put a side rack in because I had a side rack left over. And then I started filling it with gear, which is great gear that I like using. But after getting the Super Gemini the other week and doing a video on it and realizing the fun of making music and playing with instruments I love, I started thinking about what gear can I actually get rid of? And part of the reason for that is this book. This is Essentialism by Greg McKeown, The Disciplined Pursuit of Less. And in this book, Greg basically talks about the idea of essentialism, which is not quite the same as minimalism. So there's a minimalist movement or simple living movements. Essentialism is this idea that in anything you're doing, there are the essential things, and then there are superfluous things. And it's hard to see in our modern day world what's essential versus what's not essential. And his tagline of the book is less but better. And this really resonates with me because I tend to want more and more and more. I love gear. I love synthesizers. I love drum machines. I love audio interfaces. I love preamps. But I don't really need all those things. In order to make the music I want to make and mix the music I want to mix, I really just need a decent interface with enough inputs and software. However, I'm not quite willing to go that far. So as I was trying to come up with how am I going to reconfigure my studio for the Super Gemini, I started looking at, is this an opportunity to do better with less? And I thought, yes, it is. Like, if you notice, at the back of my room, there's no longer 4 keyboards on each wall. There's only 3. And this was part of the change that started happening as I started looking through and going, why do I have each keyboard and what's its purpose? So over on that wall, I've got the Roland D50, I've got the Korg DW8000, and I've got now a Yamaha DX7 2D. I used to have the TX802. And one of the reasons I have the DX7 now is it's dual layer and can hold the same voices as the TX802 can. But the 802 is complicated to get sounds into, to program up. It's 8 individual 2-voice synthesizers, whereas this is 2 8-voice synthesizers or a single 16-voice synthesizer. On the other wall over here, I've got the OB6 because I really want an Oberheim sound. I've got the Matriarch for a Moog sound, and I've got the Polyevolver because I love that keyboard, and I didn't want to get rid of it. So it was easier for me to start thinking, I don't really need the Polybrute. The Super Gemini can make sounds similar and get me in the flavor of the Polybrute, and that's fine. I didn't need the Hydrasynth, and I didn't need the AX80, which I'd bought for nostalgia reasons, really. So I simplified that down. And then I started replanning my racks. And because I had the side rack, I had more space. And because I got rid of the TX802, I had more space. And it was like, what can I fill it with? What can I fill it with? And as I was thinking about this and plotting things out, I hit that moment again where I went, wait, maybe this is an opportunity to actually have less, but do it better. And part of that decision process was, what would improve my workflow? And when it came down to it, I was doing hybrid mixing in a couple ways. I have the Mercury 7 by Meris, the 500 series modules. I got 2 of those as stereo. I love the sound of that reverb. It's the ethereal kind of Blade Runner-esque reverb is what they refer to it as. And I was using it as a send from the mix outs on the console and could add reverb externally to software-based recording. I also have gotten rid of the Burl B32 summing mixer because I found that the summing wasn't really adding that much character as I thought it might to mixes. But I kept the Heritage Successor and the EQ4M because they sound fantastic. But as I was thinking about it, I realized that, even on a 12-song album, I think only 4 of the songs, maybe 5, did I actually sum outside the box and record back into the box and mix that way. And yes, it added some character and flavor, but this is really not something I couldn't get from software. Anybody who thinks hardware is better than software is technically wrong because the software can do what the hardware can do. One is not better than the other. You just might like one more. And I do like the external hardware, but I do not like the process of switching my mixer into interface mode so that I can use the external sends, setting up the external sends, setting the hardware, finishing a mix, taking it back out of interface mode, having some time go by, realizing I need to go back to that mix, realizing that I didn't write down any of the settings I'd used, and having to redo that all by ear again when I can save that in software and make a wonderful sounding mix just the same. So basically I've decided to give up on hybrid mixing. I'm going to get rid of my EQ4M. I'm going to get rid of my Heritage Audio Successor. I was thinking of keeping the Successor as a stereo bus compressor for maybe drum overheads or something like that. But in plotting out things, I really want to get back to the point where all my gear is within hand's reach and I don't have this separate rack. Almost a year ago, I did a video called Is Your Studio Too Complicated?, where I talked about how I'd made my studio setup really complicated and difficult to work with because I was trying to leave every flexible option open. And in that video, I showed you my patch bay layout and what I was moving to. And this was my simplified version, was still 4 48-point patch bays. With everything connecting to the front of my desk so that I could patch anything to anywhere. When I did the console project and moved the console back out, I made some changes to my cabling setup so that I only used 2 patch bays. I wired a bunch of the 1/4 inches to be XLRs so they could go straight into the mixer, so that synthesizers at the back of the room just went straight into the mixer. I wasn't using external pre's for those anyways. So that simplified things down. And now I'm working on making it even simpler. So this is my new patch bay layout. I just have 2 patch bays. So my studio mics, I'm going to number them back to 17 to 28 again, because those are the inputs they go into in the Studio Live console. I'm going to get a second Newton because I really love the Newton as a channel strip. So I'll have a stereo pair, keep my radial, and keep all my preamps in there. So the bottom patch bay is basically the mic inputs going into the Studio Live through the radial 500 series box. Meanwhile, I'm going to have all my synths plugged in directly, other than the ones that are right beside me, which will be the Tempest, the KO2, and the Super Gemini. And I'm just going to have these patched in directly into these mic pre's down here. So this will be my actual layout up here of my console. I've got synths at the back of the room, drum machines at the back of the room going directly into mic inputs. I've got mic inputs available for the tracking room. But I could patch in the control room XLRs or the entry XLRs or any of the other line inputs in the control room that are at the back, especially by the drum machines when I want individual outs. And then I've laid out so that the keyboards that are in arm's reach of me are patched in with patch cables, and those are easy for me to adjust frequently because I'm right beside them. And then my Stage Vintage by default is patched in, so if I want to play the piano in the other room, it's already set up and ready to go. And all I have to do if I want to record with all 12 mic inputs for clients is pull out these 8 patch cables. And that simplified my setup quite a bit. So that's it. I'm going to get rid of hybrid mixing altogether. I'm not going to use a master bus compressor and a master bus EQ that are external to my software. I'll probably get the Maag EQ4 plugin. Currently, I've been keeping things simple in the box too because I've just been working only with the Studio One plugins. I would love to find a reverb that simulates the Meris Mercury 7 as a plugin. And maybe there's something out there. If anyone knows of something that's very similar, that'd be great because I love that ethereal reverb. I'm sure there's something else that's wonderful. It's just that I really fell in love with the Meris Mercury 7. I'm still going to have the ability to connect out my mixes. It's not that I can't do hybrid stuff or use external hardware. My default's just not going to be to do that. So I'll still have all my mix outs available at the front of my patch bay. I can plug into hardware, bring it back into any of these line inputs down here, and that'll be fine. So it's still a possibility, but I'm going to simplify my default setup so that that's not the way I'm working anymore. So once again, I recommend this book for anybody who struggles with trying to figure out what their priorities are. Greg has a really interesting thought process by which you figure out what's important to you. And that is whenever you're trying to make a decision about something, if your immediate thought isn't, hell yeah, then it's a no. The default is everything's a no, because the more you can say no to, the more you can focus on and do at the things that are actually essential. So when I think about the Successor, is it a great compressor? Hell yeah. Do I really need it in my studio process? It's not a hell yeah, so I'm not keeping it. But then if I think of something like the Roland D50 back there or the OB6 on this side, are those synths I really want to have? Hell yeah. Yes, they are. The Polybrute, I like it. It wasn't a hell yeah. The Super Gemini, oh yeah, this is probably the last synth I'll ever get rid of when I ever downsize. So that's it for me today. Thanks for listening to my ramblings. If you've got any thoughts on your simplification processes, ways you make your studio more efficient, love to hear them. Leave a comment. Thanks for watching.